Good evening, folks. Welcome. Appreciate everybody joining us for stpete.net meetup. We've got Tim Corey this evening, who's going to talk about Blazor and server-side Blazor and all the fun stuff there. I'm your host, John Calloway. Clayton Hunt is our co-host and managing of the streaming services. So let us know if you can hear us in chat. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask at any time, and we'll make sure that they get addressed. Make sure you've got a drink, slice of pizza. You've used the restroom, find a comfortable chair. We'll get started here in just a few more minutes. We'll give some of the stragglers a chance to join us. If you know anybody that might be interested in taking a look and watching the live stream, we would appreciate it if you would share. If you share with your friends, coworkers, family, anyone you think might be interested, we'd appreciate it.
And we'll give you 5% off for the next meetup.
Sure. All right, so it sounds we're good on sound. We can hear you. Looks like we've got some new faces, some new folks. Just this week heard about Blazor, so started the Microsoft tutorial, so that's good. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming out. Chris Hudson wants his 5%, Clayton.
I'll give him the coupon.
We're still looking for additional speakers, additional topics. So if anybody wants to speak or wants to hear about anything in particular, we'll do our best to find a speaker. Tim is kind enough to be joining us all the way from Texas in the middle of a move. So we appreciate that.
Happy to be here.
What about in chat? Who's the farthest away from St. Pete, Tampa Bay area? Palm Harbor, not too far.
I mean, I'm in Wamama.
All right, we've got one from Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome. Is that Sandy? Sandy J in Tennessee. Welcome. And I know Tim's got a great presentation for us and plenty of code samples, so we'll be forking the repo and adding it to the stpete.net meetup repo, as well as he'll, I'm sure, share the repo that he has on GitHub. And we can share any additional links. There's some great documentation on Blazor, and the .NET team is doing some fantastic work there.
Quite a few people that are actually outside of the actual Tampa Bay area. That's pretty cool.
Adam's all the way in Clearwater, Florida. Dragon 8 Warrior, Spring Hill, Florida, about 50 miles out. Welcome. So anybody in chat, anybody playing around with Blazor? Sandy said, just found Blazor, working through some of the tutorials there. So anybody else? I know Clayton has been working a little bit with Blazor, right?
Love Blazor. Nice. You liking Blazor, Adam?
Adam set up his personal site up in Blazor.
Excellent.
Bad Wiring did a Hello World. Anybody catch the ASP.NET community stand-up today? They had the entire Blazor team on and talking about the latest and greatest and things that are getting into .NET 5, as well as things that'll be fast follow items. They even had some of the one of the interns do a couple of different sample projects and demonstrations there. So that was a lot of fun watching.
Yeah, I missed that.
Well, we're about 3 minutes past the hour. So with that, Tim, do you want to go ahead and take over? We're doing Blazor Server Made Simple with Tim Corey.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here. So we're going to dive right in. I'm not a PowerPoint guy. I'm not a slides guy. We're going to go right to code and just start getting stuff done. So Blazor Server is my favorite template for Microsoft now as far as web goes. It used to be we only had a couple options, web forms and MVC. And now we have 5 different types, and Blazor Server has become kind of the sweet spot between all the different types. So let's look at it. So I create a new project, and we'll create a Blazor app. Let's put this in a repos folder, and we'll kind of call this, let's call it Blazor Demo 1. And this is going to be St. Pete Blazor. So I'm going to put this into a repo, and you'll have it after the talk. All right, so now that we've started the process, we have 2 options here, Blazor Server app and Blazor WebAssembly app. So the difference is that Blazor Server lives on the server. It's a server-side application, and yet it has some of that nice client-side interactivity that you would see with something like an Angular or a Vue or React. The difference is that what it does is it takes SignalR in the background, and it has a constant stream of communication between the front end and the back end. So we have that rich client side, but at the same time, we're writing all of our code in C#. Now, Blazor WebAssembly is a bit different. It uses some of the same stuff, but everything lives on the client side. And that means you can do things like progressive web applications and offline access and those kind of things. The difference is that all of our code goes down to the client, which means we can't have secure and sensitive things in our code. We have to have communication through an API for any kind of data access and so on. So that's why I say like Blazor Server is kind of like the sweet spot for me, because it's that server-side protected code. The user doesn't get our C# code at all. They don't see any access as far as what we do with SQL Server or any other sensitive data. And yet we still have the client side benefits of being able to see a counter update without having to refresh the page and those cool things. So this is the starting point is Blazor Server app. I am not going to do Docker for now. We're going to maybe look at that if we have enough time today. There's not a lot to look at there, and unless you want to dive deep into Docker, which is a whole different topic. So authentication we'll leave off for now, but again, we'll come back to that and turn that on in a little bit. But I want to first start with just a basic Blazor Server app demo. Let's hit create. And in this app, there's a few things already set up for us, so that if you're starting for a production app, there'll be a few things you need to take out. But we'll look at that and we'll look through what this does. Let's just start by hitting run though, because I think that running the application, seeing what it does, seeing how it works is a good first step. So this is a Blazor Server app. We've got our Hello World app. We've got this little survey component here we'll look at in just a minute. If you go to counter, you can click the counter and woohoo, the number changes. Let's zoom in here so you can see it change. Notice there's no full page refresh here. Even going here, we're not seeing a full page refresh, doesn't appear to be at least. What happens is that it's in the background loading that data through that SignalR connection, but it's not actually doing a full refresh. All right, let's go back to home, and I think that's about it for just looking over the demo. We'll zoom back out here and let's look at the code, because that's the interesting part here. So let's start with startup.cs. If you've ever used Blazor before, or trying to use Blazor, I encourage you to read through all this code and just kind of understand what it does. One of the things that Microsoft has really changed over the years is the fact that their code is much more readable. It used to be confusing. It used to be challenging to go through their code, but now it seems to be it's a lot more understandable. So In a startup.cs, which is where your application starts up, we have the configure services, which this is our dependency injection. So if you have any kind of code that you want to add to dependency injection, there's where you do it. So in here, services.add Razor pages. And you'll see Razor and Blazor kind of intermixed here. And so I'm going to try and clarify what Razor and Blazor means in each scenario because they're a little different. In this case, this is Razor pages, as in the server side project type from Microsoft called Razor pages. This is actually mixed in with Blazor. So you can have static pages that are server side rendered that are different than Blazor pages. For example, if we go to the shared folder, the pages folder, and look at error.cshtml, that is different than counter.razor. Well, counter.razor is actually a Blazor page, whereas error.cshtml is a Razor page. So Razor pages are fully rendered on the server, and there is no SignalR connection to update that page. There's a full page refresh every time you go to it. Whereas .razor pages, which are actually Blazor components, they are that SignalR connection works in the background to update those pages. So again, notice .razor means Blazor. It's a little confusing. Sorry. It's one of my little complaints with Microsoft there. But so we have our Razor pages being added. So we can add our own if you wanted to. You can just right click and say add new Razor page. And there you go. You have a server side rendered page. We also have server side Blazor. This is where we're setting up all of our Blazor pages. So if you create a Blazor page, you don't have to do anything to add it to dependency injection. It's just there. And then this is one of those things that is that sample code that has to be removed in a production application. But it's kind of a nice thing to see in here because it gives us a little bit of an example of how to do different pieces. In this case, we're adding a singleton to our dependency injection for weather forecast service. So we're adding a service to our DI. All right, down here under configure, this is where we're going to see that this is if it's in development, this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about how you know if you're in development mode or not in just a minute. But if you're in development, we're going to use the developer exception page. Otherwise, use the exception handler on the /error page. Remember that error.cshtml page? That Razor page is our exception handler. So we'll see that page in just a few minutes. And then it uses HSTS, which just enforces the SSL. Also, we have here HTTPS redirection. I'm pretty sure you can figure out what that does. We really want to force everybody to use our SSL version of our site, and that's what that does. And so even in development, we'll see that we're using our HTTPS version. And so you have to have a development certificate, which Microsoft will set up for you for free for, really quick and dirty work. Use static files and use routing, and then endpoints down here. This right there, that line is all there is to SignalR. Now you can expand on this if you wanted to. Let's say you're using the Azure SignalR service. You could point that to your Azure SignalR service and have that kind of offload the SignalR work. But when it comes to SignalR and setup, I know it can be confusing sometimes what a hub is and how that works and the endpoints and all the rest. Blazor made that super simple. It's one method and it's just map Blazor hub. So if you want to get up and running and there's SignalR somewhere in there, that's all right here. All right. We have a fallback to our _host page. So this is the place where all the setup gets started. Now let's look at that error page real briefly and notice this page is just static. It says, hey, swap to development environment will display a more detailed information. Let's just run this real quick. I want to show you that error message. So you can just go to /error, and there's our error message. This is just the text that's on this page. There is no additional information it's giving you. It's not giving you any added value. And the reason why is because this is what you would show an end user. Now, if you see this, if you try and copy this and Google it, you're going to get nothing. I mean, you're going to get thousands of responses that are essentially useless to you. And the reason why, again, is this has nothing to do with your actual error. This is what you show your user because you don't want to give your user sensitive information about what's going on behind the scenes. So this is the error message that the user sees when you're in production mode. Notice it's telling you over and over again, hey, switch to development mode. Here's how you switch to development mode, and so on. Now, let's just throw an error here just to see that we are in development mode currently. So we got index.razor. This is our first Blazor page. This is a starting point. Notice up here is the @page directive. This tells us that we are starting at the root. That slash just means the root of our directory. And this is our hello world. We saw this when we first started up. I even pointed out we had that survey. How is Blazor working for you? So in here, let's add a little bit of code, which in Blazor, there's a few different ways of doing it. But the easiest way, at least to get started, is to your @code right on your Blazor page. So that mixes your HTML and your C# on one page. Now you can separate that into kind of a code behind file. And there's a couple different ways of doing that. But especially for development, when you're first starting out and when you are first developing a page, I find it easiest just to put your @code on the same page as all of your components. So you're not constantly switching back and forth between the two. So in here, this is a C# class file. Now, it's not the same as web forms, which was a little tightly tied together. This is actually, we can separate this out. We can unit test this. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. But if we do constructor, so CTUR is a snippet to create a constructor a little easier. I'm going to throw a new exception. This exception is this should not work for whatever reason. So when you first load this page, hit the constructor, the first thing it's going to do is throw an exception. Well, that's our starting page. Let's see how it responds when we do that. So we're starting up here. Trying to start up here. Oh, well, first of all, it says, hey, Visual Studio caught it. That's because we're in development mode, in debugging mode. Hit continue on that. And we get this error message, which this is actually helpful. So an unhandled exception occurred. And then it says, here's what that exception is. Well, it was on line 12 of the index page. Really helpful stuff and something that as a developer, you'd want to see. If you want to see the stack, you want to see where it's coming from. There's a lot of stuff in here. But this can be really helpful to give you more information, including the raw exception details, which there you go. The exception is this should not work. It's on line 12, and then more information, including what's going on in the stack. So this is the developer error page. It's not something you want to show to your user, but it's super helpful for you as a developer as you're working things out. Now, why did it show this versus the error page I showed you, which is that really unhelpful / error? Well, the reason why is because we're in development mode. And if you look down at the startup page, you'll see that if environment is development, use developer exception page. Otherwise, use the error page. Where is that set? Well, you can go right-click on Blazor Demo and go to Properties. And in here under the debug, and sorry, this screen is horrible to read. This is my, I increased font size. We actually talked about this before we started tonight. This is how you set up IS Express. So properties, debug, there's IS Express, and Blazor Demo 1 is actually Kestrel. So there's two different ways two different web hosts you can use in development for Visual Studio. You can use Kestrel or you can use IS Express. IS Express, one of the benefits there is it gives you a unique port number. I can't even scroll here. It's off the screen. It gives you a unique port number that's in there. Notice the SSL for all host. That's actually localhost. There's our our port number for our URL. We can actually copy the whole URL. We can actually come in here and change things if we wanted to, but I prefer to go into properties and launch settings.json. I find this much more readable, much easier to use. This is how we set up both our IS Express and our Kestrel environments. So with this, you can come in here and modify this setting right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to change so that if we're in Kestrel, we're going to be in development mode. But if we're in IS Express, we're in production mode. Okay, so that's just doing is setting up an environment variable and saying ASP.NET Core _ environment. And we're setting that environment to production at runtime. So if we run IS Express right now, it should be our production version of our site. Whereas if we go down to the Kestrel version, it will run in development mode. And that will show us that same error a different way. So let's run IS Express. Remember, it's going to throw that error right away. We hit continue, and we go to our error page. This is what the user will see in production. If we change over to Kestrel, we'll see the same error message, but in the more detail of stack trace and everything else, because we're in development mode. Just want you to see that. Those launch settings.json, really helpful. You can also rename these things if you wanted to. You want to change the name of them. You can come in here. Actually, I usually go through the properties. That way it's a little easier there. But you can come in here and modify. You can make copies, whatever you want to do in here as well. So notice right down here, it's super hard to see because it's the one font that didn't increase. But now my value says production for ASP.NET Core _ environment. Whereas for Kestrel, it says development. So you could have changed that right there as well. So that's the production versus development. We're going to see more of that going forward because that environment can be very, very helpful. One of the things we're going to look at in a little bit is our app settings.json file. And notice we expand that, we actually see an app settings.development.json. So this file overrides our app settings.json file, but only when we're in development mode. We can create another one for production mode if you wanted to. For staging mode, you can create as many modes as you want. Okay, so let's close that out. Let's launch this one more time. Let's actually take this error out because it's not nearly as fun to run an application that always errors. One of the questions I get asked a lot is, this purple is not for me. It's horrible. I get it. Not everybody's a purple fan. So it's one of those things that people often get stuck on, especially C# developers, because maybe you're not as used to the web, but this is all bootstrapped for. So you can modify anything you want with this. I want to show you real quick how to do that. I want you to be confident in the fact that this is yours to modify. So let's collapse these down so you can see the structure again. And in this structure, we have this www root folder. This is essentially the same as the root of our application. Anything you put in here, you can treat as a static file. You can put images in here. And if you put it right off the root, like the favicon, that path is your URL /favicon.ico. In here, we have our bootstrap, we have our open iconic, and we have our site.css. Inside site.css, we have a whole bunch of stuff, but one of the things we have is our sidebar. So notice this background image, which is just a linear gradient. We can come in and change this. I have picked beforehand because I'm horrible at picking colors. I picked some colors beforehand just so you have an example of this. So let's do that. 30707E. So now if we run this same application again, there you go. So you can get rid of the purple. It's a little different. You can make your Blazor demo not look like every other Blazor demo out there. Okay, we're gonna come back to that navigation menu in just a minute because that's important to note but let's look at a page because you've seen we kind of danced around it a little bit, but let's look at a page now and just see what's in these pages. Let's look at index first. So this is a Blazor component, which is a .razor extension. I know it's confusing. Just write it down, say it to yourself 5 times, memorize it. That's what you got to do. Starting off, if we're going to use this component as a page, and that's important. If we want to use it as a page, we say at page and then give it the path that it's going to be. This is our routing. Now, I do say if we want to use it as a page, because not every component has to be a page. And this is where you get the real power of Blazor. Often people miss this when they first start. Blazor components are just that, they're components. So when you're working with a component, you can nest them deeply. You can use one component on a different page. We'll see that in just a minute. But in this case, we have a full page component, and that's our index page, which just has hello world. Now, if I wanted to, let's get rid of this code here. Let's look at a different page that has a little bit more to it than just the page directive. Let's go to the counter page. This is that page where you click the button and it changes the number, which is super exciting, I know. But we have an at page here. We also have our at code section. Remember that I just added that at code section just for our exception. Well, this is where the code behind, if you want to call it that, it's not a code behind, it's a separate file, yada, yada. But let's call it a code behind because simplicity. This is where our code behind lives. So we have a couple things going on here. We have, first of all, a current count. That's the counter value we started from. So we start from 0, and then we increment the count. We add 1 to the number. Well, how do we increment that count? Well, on the button we have here, we have an at onclick. This is a Blazor specific command. So the at onclick, notice the at indicates that it's a C# command. So at onclick, just call the increment count. The really cool thing here is there's no weird event args and sender and all the rest you have to worry about. You're just calling a method. So you just pass the method name in there, you're good to go. So in this case, on click, whenever you click the button, it's going to fire this event. That's it. Now, one of the things to note in here is that these are private because we're working with the front end of our page. That's why I say it kind of sounds and feels like a code behind because this is private just to this page. So you don't have to make it public. You have to expose all your information to all the other pages. You can make it private. So on click runs that through and it's going to increment that value. That's kind of cool. Let's go a step further and look at fetch data. So the fetch data page, this is where we actually use that service that I said let's get rid of in the future. And the fetch data page and counter page should be eliminated for your production apps as well. But again, they're great examples. So you have the path is /fetch data, but then we have this using statement, which if you're familiar with C#, you know what a using statement is. It just makes your life a little easier. It allows you to not have to type that every time you want to reference something inside of that namespace. So that's one way to do a using statement. We also have at inject. This is where we're pulling information in from dependency injection. So we have in dependency injection weather forecast service. Remember, we saw that in startup.cs, weather forecast service. And so here we're asking dependency injection to give us that service. We call it forecast service. And then down here, we're using that forecast service to do work. In this case, to get a forecast asynchronously. So some good examples there of how to do both a using statement and injecting from dependency injection. Now, there are other things you can do up at the top that we'll have to play with. But one of them is you want to also not use this using statement. So you don't want to have 30 using statements up here. In fact, we're probably actually using more than just this. If we go over to the underscore imports.razor file, you'll see a whole bunch of using statements. This is the equivalent of putting these at the top of every one of our Razor components. Now, this is at the top level, which means it applies to all Razor components that are created below this top level. You can create multiple of these imports files at different levels and have different amounts of using statements applied to each Razor component from that level down. But in this case, it applies to everything. Personally, I just use this and I don't bother with multiple levels. So if you wanted to, we go back to our fetch data, our using the data folder. Let's get rid of that. And it's going to cause this to error out. Whoops, not that one. Let's save this. It will cause our fetch data to error out and says, got a problem. We come over here to @using, and we'll say @using, and it was Blazor demo1 .data.
Real quick, there's a question in chat. How does @inject translate with import/export in React or Angular?
Well, I'm not a big Angular person. So what inject is doing, let me explain that, and then you can tell me if I'm answering your question or not. So what inject is doing is when the page gets created, it's going to our dependency injection container, which was created here or configured here actually. And it's saying, hey, I need this before I can do anything on the page. So before I can render this page, before I can do work on this page, I have a dependency. And this dependency is on the weather forecast service. So the system says, okay, I've got a container that has a whole bunch of stuff in it. And one of those things is the weather forecast service. So I'll go ahead and pull that out and I'll put that instance in here. Now, in this case, we ask for a singleton, which a singleton means that one instance, every time you ask for it, you're going to get the same instance. And it's going to take that instance and put it into this page. And then from there, you can use that instance for all of your calls. So we have access to it, for example, right here. Now, if we had, if we went into, let's go find this, weather forecast service. This forecast service does not depend on anything. So that's kind of the end of the dependency chain. But if it depended on something, when the fetch data said, I depend on weather forecast service, and the container said, okay, I have one of those, when it went to instantiate the weather forecast service, it would say, wait, weather forecast service depends on iConfiguration, iLogging. Therefore, I'll create those, I'll put those into the constructor, then I'll create the forecast service, then I'll give it to you. This is the benefit of dependency injection, is that up front, we're saying, this is what I depend on. And then we allow the container to tell us what those dependencies are, what the values are. That way, if we want to do unit testing, we can change what we inject in here. Also, if you decide, you know what, I've created a better weather forecast service, you can come to startup and change that value right there to better work weather forecast service, and it changes for your entire application. There's no more going and finding 18 different references to weather forecast service. So those are some of the benefits. That's how it works. Does that answer your question, hopefully? If not, put in the chat. We'll talk more in a little bit. All right. So that's how the imports works. And now we're able to see this weather forecast service without having that using statement here, because we've added it to the using statement list inside of imports.razor. Okay, so that's some of the cool stuff we can do. We also have this one, which is as implements. So let's, just like in C#, we have a class that's going to implement an interface. There are times we want our Blazor component to implement an interface. For example, if we have an iDisposable. So if we say, you know what, iDisposable. And what iDisposable says is we're going to have in our class a public void dispose. And then in there, we'll do some kind of work. Well, that's how you implement that interface. So now we have our dispose method. And now if we close out this page, and I'll show you that, if we close out this page, it's going to hit that dispose method and clean up any events that we subscribe to, or any open database connections, or whatever else you have. So we're on the counter page. Cool, we can click here. Let's go to the home page again, and notice we're now hitting our breakpoint here for dispose, meaning we're going to clean up any resources we depended on. We need to close properly. So that's how our implementation of interfaces works. Okay, and again, if you have questions, shout them out in the chat. Either the guys will answer them, or they'll bring them up to me, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, so let's talk through the page. Let's actually use these components, because we've talked about the fact that, yeah, you can go a /counter. That's kind of cool. But this is a component. It's not just a page. So let's go to the index page. And in here, I'm going to do /counter, which, does that sound familiar? That's not a typical HTML tag, but instead, that's the name of my component. It's the name of the component, not the page directive. But now I have that component on my index page. So if I run this again, you'll see that not only have I have hello world, I also have my counter right on the index page. So it took this little chunk of code here, just this little bit, and it put it right here. So now I can click this, notice it changed the number. It's not the same as this. And in fact, if I wanted to, that's going to look horrible. Please forgive me. If we want to make it look pretty, it's going to take a lot longer. So I put 3 components on there. So now I have 3 different counters on this page. I can click this one. Notice this one changes. These 2 do not. I can click them independently. And now I have 3 independent components on this page. So for example, if you create a component that was, let's say, 1 user, and you had their image, and they had their name and their employee ID, you could take your list of employees and then do a grid with all your different users and populate their information into it, and have the same component rendered multiple times with different information inside of it. Which does bring a question up of, yeah, but how do you get information into it? That's a great question. I'm glad I asked it. So, parameter. Prop. Prop is a shortcut for creating a auto property. So prop and tab twice. And it's going to use a snippet to create your auto property. Just save me typing. So let's call this current count, kind of mirror what we have here. But instead of having this private variable, I'm going to change it everywhere to be that property instead. Okay, so nothing else has changed. We're using a public property instead of a private property. Now, I did say that we can use private stuff because we're just talking to our page. But now you want to actually bring information from the outside and put it into this, this page. So now if we save this, we come back to this counter. Notice if I hit space, I see current count. I can say current count is 15. And just for fun, current count is 12. And current count is 2. And by the way, I should have initialized that value. There we go. So by default, it'll be 0, but we can pass in a value into our component. So now if we run this, wait for it to load. Now we have 3 different counters with 3 different starting values. And they still work. They still count up like so. But now we've figured out how to pass information in. So again, that employee component you want to create, you could pass in the first name, the last name, the employee picture, and employee ID if you wanted to, either as individual components, or you could pass in a model here. So first name, last name, and email address all inside one model. Pass that model in as a parameter, and you could pass that through. So really cool stuff you can do there. But let's talk about how do we actually get information out. So maybe I want to, instead of passing information in, maybe I want to get information back out to modify my page. So private int index counter, like so. And now we have this value. We're going to say, hello world, welcome to your app. The value of our index counter is at index counter. Nope. I love IntelliSense. So this is using the Razor syntax. So if you're familiar with ASP.NET MVC or ASP.NET Core MVC or Core Razor pages, this is that same syntax. You put an at in front of something and it says, oh, you mean C# code. And so it goes and look for C# code. And then it's smart enough to know that, okay, you're done with C# code now. So if I put a dot at the end of it, that's not a good example. If I put a, is, counter, okay, something like that, it knows, okay, that's HTML now. So there are times when it causes a problem. Like I said, a dot would actually cause an issue because it says, wait, do you mean C# dot or do you mean HTML dot? It's going to assume C#. So you'd have to wrap this, in which case you'd wrap this in, you can wrap it in parens, and then it knows the dot, and it's okay. If the parens say, okay, the parens are done, then we're really done. This is one of those things where Microsoft is trying to balance a whole bunch of different stuff working the page at the same time. And so it's trying to figure out, is it C#, is it HTML? How do we do IntelliSense? All that stuff going on at once. So there's a lot of stuff going on. It's not going to get it right all the time. It's still a work in progress there because some of this is just guesswork based upon our workflows. But in this case, this is going to give us the index counter, which is going to start off at 0. But this is the main page. So let's just run this real quick just to show that it's there, but nothing happens to it. So our value of our index counter is 0. I should put a paragraph tag there. Okay, I can change my counters, but that doesn't change the 0. Let's change that. So first of all, let's put a paragraph tag around this. That way it's on a new line. And now let's work at, we can take away these two, and we're going to work at getting information back from our counter. So our counter is going to be clicked, and we're going to take information back out of it. So to do that, what we're going to do is come over to our counter here, and we are going to create another parameter. And we're going to create a prop event callback. And we can either do an event callback that has nothing attached to it. It just says, hey, this happened. So if we want to just track the button was clicked, then we could do an event callback. But in our case, I want to send data back with the call, in which case I want to say of type int. And so this is going to say, whenever I click the button, I'm going to send a value back. And let's just call this, I don't know, button was clicked. Really descriptive name right there. Good name is hard, but I think I nailed it. So now we have our increment counter. And in here, what we can do is notice that on click, we're calling this increment count, which adds 1 to our number. We can also say we want to invoke this, this button. So button was clicked dot invoke async. It's an asynchronous call. And we're going to invoke it and say, here's the value to pass in. We're going to get totally uncreative and just do current count. Now, when we're invoking async, we should probably await that, but we're going to avoid how you do that. Async task instead does not change anything about how this works. It'll work with void or async task. But now I can say await if you want to, and now it's going to await that asynchronous call if we want to. We don't have to, but that way we're not shouting into the void. So now we have this call back the other direction. Let's take this off for now. I'm going to show you why in just a minute. But we're going to say button was clicked, and we're going to have some type of call. Update counter, like so, which doesn't exist. No problem. Private void update counter, and we need to pass in that integer. So now we can say index counter equals count. So now what's going to happen is that when we click the button on our counter page, we're going to call this increment count method. That adds 1 to our value for current count. And then it fires the button was clicked event, and it passes the value in of our new counter value. On the index side, we have subscribed to that event and said when you call this method, or when you click the button and you send that event off and say this happened, I'm going to listen for it in the update counter method. And that's this right here. I have to accept in this type because of the fact that over here I specified that is of type int. It's going to pass an integer through. So I'm listening for that, and then I put that value into our index pages count. Let's run this. Okay, button is 0, current count is 0. Click me, current count is 1. So I've passed that value back from the counter over to our index page. Now, this will still work on our main counter page as well. It's firing that event off, but it's not actually being listened to by anybody. So come back over here, it's still in 0, which is reset the page anyways. Now, I did say that I didn't want to set that value and change the value, and here's why. If I say current count equals 15, and I run this, this is a fun little, it's not a bug, but it's a fun little thing that happens that is frustrating. Click me. Index count is 16. Current count is 15. Why? Click it again. Nothing seems to happen. I just broke my application. In fact, I searched through to figure out, did I have some kind of hidden event that happened, or did I eat a exception somewhere? Nope, you didn't do that. Every time this comes back and it runs this, it's going to send this value back to the counter, which resets that value back to 15. So on our page, it says 16. On their page, it says 15. And then it never changes because it's always adding 1, which is 16, sending it over to the index page. Index page updates their value and sends back 15, which puts back on the counter. And now it looks like we're in a loop. The way to fix this is to pass in the index counter, if you want to do it this way. Okay. So now we're passing back the value the index page has. So now it works as intended. And if we start the index value off at a different value, like 15, then that will pass through the counter. It will update the counter, and life will be good. All right. So that's how you send data back from a counter. That's how you send data in or back from a component, and then also into a component. And you can do multiple of these parameters. All right. So we still got some time here. I know I'm blazing through this. Just so you know, I'm going to put all this in a repo. In fact, let me pull that up real quick. John talked about it earlier. I do have a repo called github.com/timcorey/St. where I'll have all this code. I'm waiting to put it up there until after we modify it so you can see the exact code that I modified. You can download and play with it. But in here, I also have 3 different links that may be of importance. Intro to Blazor Server, Intro to Blazor Components, and also free Blazor resources. So those go into more depth. So I apologize if I'm going really fast here tonight, but I want to kind of give you a good overview of how to get started, how to mess with Blazor and really take it to the next level. And if you want to go further in depth, there's ways of doing that. So let's get back to it. So in here, let's talk about forms first, because a website usually has to get information from a user. So let's do that. I'm gonna, in data, let's create a new class. And that class is going to be the person model. It's gonna be a really complicated class. Hopefully you can follow along. Prop for creating that auto property. First name, last name. All right, so there's my complicated class. This probably exactly mirrors what you have in production, I'm sure. You don't have anything more complicated than that. So person model, the first name and last name, let's actually use this to create a little form. All right, we're gonna create a form that doesn't look good, that's okay. So to do this, we're gonna create a new page. So right click on pages and say add. And you can come up here to Razor Component if you want. This is a newer feature that's in Visual Studio to add the shortcut to Razor Component. But if you want to say new item, then look for Razor Component. Again, a Blazor page is a Razor component. Sorry. So the dot Razor is what's important here. If you've selected Razor component, you can overwrite the whole thing. It will append dot Razor to the end. So let's call this our cool form, because why not? And we're going to create a form on this page. But the first place to start is to make sure that you can get to the page. Because right now, if we went to the cool form, we wouldn't get anything. We wouldn't see this because there is no path to it. Since we want to use this as a whole page, we want to say at page, and we want to give it a path. Now, this is where I want to, again, demonstrate that the page name and the component name are different. So let's call this just /form. That's perfectly fine. In fact, if you want to say /data/form, that would also work. So there's our form. We have our cool form. And now let's just make sure this actually runs. So we'll launch this up. And on this page, we're going to say /data/form. And there's our cool form, which is spectacular right now. So in here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of things. We're going to start with private person model. Person equals new person model. So this is an instance of our person model. You're going to do it this way, not through dependency injection, because for models, we don't typically put those into dependency injection. So now that I have my person model, I'm going to create my form. We're going to say edit form. And this is a little tricky. This is where, again, like I said, Microsoft's trying to balance all these different things in the page and what is each piece. This is where it gets it wrong. And so what I encourage you to do is close out the tag right now and then come back and edit the edit form. And the reason why is if you don't do that, notice it changes the color of this code right here, and it can cause some weird issues to go on. So if you do it this way and then come back, then these issues here don't affect those issues down there. So we're going to first say our model. This is what the where the data is going to go on our form. So our model is at person. So this class instance is going to be our model. This is why we instantiate it right away, because if it's null, we can't put values into first name and last name. So now we have a person model. I'm going to create, let's just go with those two fields. So input text. This is a Blazor specific component. No, remember that Blazor is all about components. Well, this is one that Microsoft created for us. It's for text fields. And in here, I'm going to say at bind value, and the bind value is going to be on person, notice IntelliSense, dot first name. It's going to bind on the first name. It's okay. That property is what I'm going to put into my value. I have one more input text at bind value on person.last name. And there are other types of inputs. So just so you know, if you do input, notice we have the checkbox, date, number, select, text, and text area. So some cool stuff in there if you need to do that. Button, class equals btn dash, let's go with primary. This is Bootstrap stuff. So if you're not familiar with what this is, if you go to getbootstrap.com, it'll walk you through Bootstrap 4. There's a lot of great documentation there. It's one of the best documentation sites I've seen because it not only does it tell you what stuff is, it shows you how to use it right there. So these are classes inside Bootstrap that just make our buttons look pretty instead of dull and gray. So
we've got a quick question in the chat.
Sure.
Sorry. What's the difference between at bind value and at bind?
There's more than one type of bind, I believe. I'm not sure if I've ever used any besides bind value, but there's options for other types of bindings besides just value. That's what the difference is. So in general, use at bind value until you find out that you ran to a wall and you can't have to do something else. All right. We're going to say type equals submit. This is just an HTML normal thing. And then we'll call this the submit button. So this is our form. So if you're familiar with CS, or I'm sorry, with HTML, this is close to a standard form, but we're doing an edit form, which is a component. It's a Blazor component. And this edit form is going to translate into an HTML form on our page. So now down here, let's create a method, private void handle valid submit, like so. And we're going to do something with our code or with our values. In this case, I'm just going to put a breakpoint here. We can inspect the values. We're not actually going to do anything with those values. Up in my edit form, I'm going to say that I want to, I'm drawing a blank here. Where is it? There we go. On valid submit. There's handle valid submit and on valid submit. So we have on, and there's on invalid submit, on submit, and on valid submit. And so the difference here is probably pretty self-explanatory, but let's talk through it. If you have validation of your data, so you're saying, okay, a first name has to be at least 2 characters long. It can't have numbers in it, let's say. Well, if a person put numbers in the first name field and they hit submit, the on invalid submit would handle that request and say, okay, this is not valid text. You could do something with it. On valid submit only will fire if the text is valid. And then on submit says, we don't care, just always fire. So those are the 3 options. We're gonna do on valid submit and say handle valid submit. There we go. So what that will do is it will handle anytime a person hits the submit button and these fields are filled in properly according to our validation, which I don't have any validation right now, so it'll always be true. Let's fire this off. So we have /data/form as our page. Let's run this. /data/form. There's our form. It's spectacular, I know. Let's put an actual name in. Tim Corey. There we go. Notice the green outline. If you can see that, that's just the validation saying, yep, that's valid, which everything's valid. So all valid. But Tim Corey, I hit submit. We now hit this breakpoint here. And if we go to our locals window and look at the person object, we'll see that the first name is Tim, the last name is Corey. So without having to do anything else, there's no data being passed into our handle valid submit, nothing. It's just basically working. It's not magic. but it's like magic. I personally hate magic. I want to know why it works that way. Well, the way it works this way is we say the model. This is the data where the data is going to go. And then we're going to bind every single property that we want to fill in to an input. So first name, last name, and so on. We hit submit, and it fills that that object in. And that's the important part here, is that it's going to fill this information in right away. It's not waiting until you hit submit in order to put the first name in. When I type the first name in, it gets filled in. So you shouldn't be using this model. This shouldn't be a model you can't change, or a model that can only be changed if it's valid information. You want this to be a separate model that you can validate first and then put into your actual database or put into your actual list or so on. So just make sure that you're not kind of shortcutting the process and using a model that can't be changed if it's not valid data. So that is a form. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to show you authentication. That's a big question mark people have, is, yes, but how does this actually work with authentication? To do that, let's right click on our solution and say add new project. We'll create another Blazor app. We're going to call this our Blazor demo 2. Hit create. Blazor Server app. We're going to change the authentication to individual user accounts. Hit OK. And hit create. So this is going to set up Microsoft's standard identity authentication system. And the interesting thing to note here, let's close all documents, is that in here, and let's set as a startup project as well. In here, this is actually going to set up just like you'd see in an MVC project. So that's just standard stuff. And in fact, if we come down here to, not program, startup, if we look down here, we'll see we have map controllers. This is actually, they're bringing in MVC stuff for our identity. If we were to run this, let's start up, where's my package manager? View, other tool windows, and in here is somewhere, package management console. Before I do that, I do want to look at app settings.json. Notice we have a connection string in here. And this connection string is to a local DB connection, which means it's going to create a database for me in my local DB. The name is just awesome. It's ASP.NET Blazor 2 and then a GUID. I would encourage you, before you do anything else, change this name, because otherwise you'll have a list of those in your local DB and you have no clue what they are. And you don't want to delete them because one might be important and the other 18 are not. So let's name this St. Pete Blazor. That's our database name. Or let's actually add auth to it. There we go. We'll save that. And now in here, we can say update database. Spell. That's going to build our application and then update our database. Could not load Blazor 1. Of course not. Try it again. Let it think about it. So that's going to build our database. If we go over to our SQL Server Object Explorer, we expand this out. We go to databases. We now see the St. Pete Blazor auth database, along with the delete this database. In here, we have tables. We have all of our user tables. This is all entity framework stuff. We have our stored procedures in here. Actually, I have none. Excellent. But this is all of our stuff in here. So if we look at user table, we can view data on this, and there's no users for my current login system. But if I run this, and I've changed over to the authentication system, notice the purple again. We now have the register, log in, about. So I can register myself, my super secret password. I hit register. And this is a shortcut. So in development mode, we don't want to send out emails to real people saying, hey, here's your login for this demo app. So when we're in development mode, and we have not registered an email system to handle sending out emails, we can't ask the user to confirm their account. It's typically send an email out to them saying, hey, is this you? Click this link. If so, they click the link and it updates our database to say, yep, they're a real person, their real address. Well, this is a shortcut. You click the button, and it's essentially that's the link we would have sent out via email. So now they're confirmed. Now we can log in. And if we do that, we now see that, hey, I'm logged in as Tim at I am Tim Corey. I'm going to log out real quick. I want to show you, well, first of all, let's refresh this. And notice we now have a user, Tim at I am Tim Corey in my database. But let's close all of this. And let's look at, let's go to the pages and go to the counter page. This is really sensitive data. I don't want to allow this. So attribute, authorize. So that attribute and the authorize here, what it's saying is this page, you have to be logged in order to see it. Now you can go even further and say you have to be in a certain role or have a certain claim and so on. But if you're familiar with C# and let's say MVC authentication, it's the same kind of thing you apply to a class. Well, this is applying it to our Blazor component. So now if I go to this, the counter page, notice I'm not logged in. But counter, it says not authorized, which is a horrible message, but at least it's something, right? So we can actually change this to be even better. But first, let's log in. Now you can go to the counter page because I'm authorized. All right. So let's log out again and let's make a change that page saying, hey, you're not authorized. That was kind of ugly. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the page down here. I always forget where this is, but it is in the app.razor page. This is a little bit different if you'll notice. Now, we didn't cover this very much in the other talk, but the other section. This is the app.razor when you don't have authentication. We have a router that says, hey, if you pass in a route, here's what to do. If you found that route, here's what to do. If you didn't find the route, here's what to do, essentially. In the new system, we now have cascading authentication state, which still does the router, but we also have to do an authorized route view saying, are you authorized? Yes, the view exists, but are you authorized to do something with it? Well, this is a self-closing tag, but if we take that off and close ourselves, and then come down here, we have a couple of options in here, and we have not authorized. So if we say, you know what, if you're not authorized, let's fix this tag. If you're not authorized, here's the message to show. You can put a page in here. You can put a component if you want, but let's just put a H1 access denied. Really nice and personal. And get out, something like that. Okay, so that's now our error page instead of that just not authorized. So now if we run this again, we go to the counter page, we get that access denied, get out, whatever. That allows you to kind of customize what you can do. You can even have a redirect down here that sends back to home when they hit a button, or just in general. It's really up to you how you do your error page. But I would encourage you to do something there besides just access denied or not authorized. So that's how to deal with a 1,000-foot overview authentication. So we've covered a lot of ground. I apologize for the speed, but I really want to get through and kind of skip over the mountaintops of these different areas to just let you see what's available in there, and then you can dive into more detail into any one that you want to look at. I would encourage you, look at those components and try and break down how does a Blazor component work? How do you deal with it? How do you put it on a page more than once? Those kind of things, because it's really the heart and soul of Blazor. And it's one of the reasons why I love working with Blazor pages. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
All right, we'll look to chat for additional questions. With Blazor, it's been Blazor Server at least has been fully supported GA since November of last year. Is that right?
Yeah, November 2019. So if you're curious, Blazor WebAssembly was just GA in May of 2020. It's a little newer.
Yeah, so lots of great stuff coming out. I'll post a link to the community stand-up from this morning as well, or actually to the community stand-up main site. You can take the first video there. They had the entire Blazor team on, as well as one of the interns that was doing some demos. So continuing to do great work. It's no longer an experiment. It is production ready. Companies are utilizing it. So it's getting some really good support and really good feedback. And they've been discussing what is making it into the .NET 5 release this coming November, as well as what's going to be coming as fast follow items. So things that didn't make it into the latest branch that they're planning on releasing this November. So we've got some comments in chat. Hudson saying that was a great presentation, Tim. I agree. Great job.
Thank you.
Bobby Donovan says looks fairly easy to use. We've got some thank yous. Are you doing much with Blazor in a production environment yet? Or are you still assembling courses and that type of thing? Or do you want to mention your courses on YouTube and the like?
Sure. Yeah, I unfortunately don't do a ton of production anymore. I have consulting clients, but I'm trying to limit those just because I spend most of my time doing training. That's kind of what I do. I have a YouTube channel where I produce videos twice a week. On Mondays, we talk about code, so we write code. And then on Thursdays, I answer dev questions. So that's any kind of question you have about, being a developer. It's not just about writing code. There's a whole lot more to it. And so that's what I cover on Thursdays. So that's kind of my main focus. But I will tell you personally, I am building an application for my students. We're going to use, and that's all in Blazor Server because it's just tremendous. The cool thing is, I didn't really mention this, but there is Blazor WebAssembly, and Blazor WebAssembly is similar, but one of the really cool things is that it uses practically everything you do in Blazor Server, you can do in Blazor WebAssembly. The differences are just data access and anything around using secure stuff. So you don't have an app settings.json, that kind of stuff. But a lot of the same components can be put into your Blazor WebAssembly app as well. So I'm doing a lot of that on the personal side. Not much on the production side other than what I'm building for courses. So
great. And we've got some questions in chat where you're located, and Clayton answered that you just recently moved to Texas.
Texas. Love it. I see the sun every single day. It's just amazing. It's warm. I came from Pennsylvania where it's overcast and a little cooler, a lot cooler. So I'm a warm weather person, so I love Texas.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. We'll give a few more minutes on any questions in chat. We'll put up links to your presentation, links to the GitHub account. We'll be forking that with the stpete.net GitHub account as well, so that we've got a copy of that. And would encourage everybody to get involved and join us on meetup.com, the discussion forums there. Join us on Facebook groups. Follow us on Twitter. Like and subscribe here on Twitch. So go ahead and hit that heart button. If you want to subscribe, you can you can do so freely if you've got an Amazon Prime account. We'd love to have you. And we will be backing up this video to YouTube for later viewing as well.
Excellent.
So there, Adam's got a question or comment. There's greater financial cost with Blazor Server because of the SignalR over Blazor WebAssembly?
No. Technically, yes. Technically, there is that open connection that you are connecting to every single client. But that cost is not one you're going to experience in most scenarios. So I believe you have to look, and maybe John or Clayton, you'll know, but Microsoft did some testing with some Azure instances, and it was really impressive. They were getting 10, 20,000 people on an Azure instance at the same time using Blazor SignalR, and that was one instance. So unless you're anticipating you're going to have 20,000 plus users at the same time, not just different times during the day, they have 20,000 hits, but 20,000 at the same time, you probably won't see a noticeable issue. But if you are, you can offload that SignalR to a separate service. Like I said, Azure has a SignalR service you can offload to improve performance. Of course, you can scale out multiple machines. So yes, there is a performance hit, but it's not something you'll notice.
What about financial? Azure billing is completely ridiculously complicated, so it's hard to tell. But is there a significant billing or financial cost associated with that? How do they bill or calculate cost? Or is it consumption for SignalR? Or
so SignalR, I believe it's consumption, but it's I'm not a billing expert. Anybody that says they are is probably a liar. But it's very insignificant, I believe, for SignalR connections. I was looking into it briefly. As far as web hosting itself goes, even that you can do in the free a free web app. You can launch this application and go. So, and part of it is with Blazor Server, you're doing a pre-render on the server. So you're getting a little bit of that server side work like you would with a Razor Pages or an MVC application. But then you're sending down to the client, having the client do a render. And then from then on, it's really just those differences. And those differences are very tiny. They send back and forth. If you want to open up your Chrome developer tools and go to the network tab and just watch the communication back and forth, we're talking bytes go back and forth, not kilobytes, not megabytes, bytes. I often get pushback with that's still a lot of information going across the pipeline. I would encourage you sometime go to cnn.com with your network tab open on your Chrome developer tools. It's about 20 megabytes. Get download on a desktop app. You're not going to see that on a Blazor Server app. So it really comes down to what you do with it. You can push 20 megabytes down through it. You can bog your server down. You can absolutely make that SignalR connection painfully slow. But that's if you're trying to push through thousands of records to the client and keep those updated as you update on a server. Yeah, that's kind of on you though. Doesn't matter what kind of platform you use, you're gonna have performance issues. So, but it can be very, very performant and very, very tiny what it transfers through. I actually pay a server, intra server. If you email me, tim@imtimcorey.com, I'll send you the link. But intra server, I believe I pay $5 a month, and I have hosting for multiple sites and unlimited subdomains. And so I create a course, which ASP.NET Core, where we talk about which one of the 5 different project types do you want to use in any one given project. So you have API, and you have Razor Pages and MVC and Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. And so I created the same site 5 different times and talked through the differences. And then I hosted that on my intra server account. So one $5 a month payment hosts all those. I haven't seen an issue.
Okay, and we've got another question. Will Blazor ever support Angular or React?
Good question. My response to that is why? And part of that is just me being me. If you are looking to have an Angular or React, you're probably better off having an API. So doing the .NET Core API and then sending it right to Angular instead of trying to host it inside of a Blazor app. I'm not sure I see the benefit of mixing those 2 client-side frameworks. If you want to have some cool display stuff that maybe Blazor can't do, there's a lot of JavaScript libraries that will do that, but you don't need the full framework, client-side framework like an Angular or React in order to do that. You just need the display side of things, and there's some really tiny libraries that do that for you.
To speak to that just a little bit, I have actually done some research on earlier versions of Blazor. at work, I have a large scale Angular application, and I desperately would like to change that over to Blazor, although it looks like we're just going to do away with the application altogether. But while I was thinking, while I was thinking about how to convert it to Blazor from Angular, without doing like a big bang, like, okay, we've written the whole app again, using Angular elements, you can actually componentize your Angular application into effectively web components. And then from there, you can integrate those with Blazor and have the Blazor and the web components both doing what they're supposed to be doing and living on the same page while you transition everything to Blazor. But Blazor's the way to do it. Yeah, Blazor's the way of the future. So if you're on Angular React, just switch to Blazor. You'll never look back. You'll love it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I hear a lot is, I want to do both. And one of the reasons why I'm so big on Blazor Server is because you get a lot of that same benefit of Angular, React, or so on, but your team doesn't have to know 2 different languages. I mean, we all know the complexity of JavaScript, and I've used JavaScript for a number of years, but it's always still painful to try and keep those skills up to date while keeping my C# skills up to date. Whereas with Blazor, you get to have your team just be in C# and supported from client side all the way through the server backend. You still need to know some JavaScript for some cool stuff, but yeah, it allows you to reuse those skills and go deep into one language rather than multiple.
Yeah, you can have that one dev, that weird dev in the corner that likes JavaScript, do all the JavaScript stuff. Everybody else can stay in C#.
And to be honest, I love JavaScript. But I like to have one language to support instead of 2. So.
Yeah, well, I actually quit C# for several years and went over to JavaScript, and it was right about the time that Angular 2 and React were coming out, and C# had kind of gone stale. There wasn't really a whole lot going on. And then, massive framework fatigue on the JavaScript side, and C# decided to do interesting stuff because they're jerks. But now I'm happy to be back in C#. The JavaScript just wore me out.
It's hard.
Okay, we'll say last call for questions. So if you've got something burning, a hole in your pocket, or whatever that is supposed to mean, if you've got some burning questions you want to ask Tim before we go, please go ahead and ask that in the comments. Before you go, please do follow, subscribe, follow on Twitter, hit up Tim Corey. There's his YouTube channel below his name. Of course, we'll have the code samples everywhere, and follow us on Twitter. We'll continue to do this as virtual as long as we need to, and back in person when it's safe to do so. But with that, we will be back here next month, same time, second Tuesday of the month, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're looking for speakers for coming up for upcoming episodes or meetups or sessions. So if you've got anything interesting that you'd like to share, then we'd love to have you. If you want to volunteer yourself or a coworker, we'd certainly enjoy having their names. Yep. Or if there's something of interest that you'd particularly like to see, we'll do our best to find anything. But with that, looks like we've got some thank yous in the comments. Outstanding. Hard to have a beer with fellows. Yeah. So yeah, we'll look to get back in person when it's safe to do so. Until that, we'll continue to do this virtually. If everybody likes that, if you've got any comments, questions, feedback for us, we'd love to hear that as well.
Cool.
All right. Thanks to Tim. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
See ya.